Welcome to Reformed Thinking, the deep dive, where we basically strip away modern assumptions to uncover the unyielding realities of the ancient biblical texts.
Yeah, which is so necessary right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because, if you poll most people today about how they view God, you usually get a picture that looks a lot like a celestial therapist.
The celestial therapist, that is exactly it.
Right. Just think about how that plays out for you in your daily life. You come to this therapist figure with your anxieties, your moral slip-ups, or, just general frustrations.
Right, and this deity essentially just nods, takes a few notes, and affirms whatever you happen to be feeling.
Exactly. It's just constant validation.
It is a profoundly comfortable image, honestly. The underlying assumption is that God exists primarily to facilitate our self-actualization.
Yeah, like a cosmic life coach.
Exactly. We treat the divine as this cosmic sounding board whose main job is to say, your truth is valid, you're doing your best, I support your journey.
Right, but in that framework, there's no real accountability.
None. There is no objective moral standard that demands our submission, and certainly no concept of holy wrath. It's totally safe, manageable, and just, built around human preferences.
And that framework is incredibly pervasive. We see it in how people pray, expecting God to just rubber stamp their plans.
Oh, all the time?
We see it in how society discusses morality, where the highest virtue is simply being authentic to yourself.
Right, authenticity is king.
But then you step into the world of the texts we're unpacking today, and suddenly that therapist's couch is completely gone.
Yeah, the warm, fuzzy lighting is replaced by blinding, terrifying holiness.
It really is. Today, we're diving deep into two specific passages. Genesis chapter 4, verses 5 through 8, and Psalm 7, verse 11.
And what we find here is definitely not an endlessly indulgent grandfather figure.
Not at all.
Huh.
We are brought face to face with a sovereign who meticulously inspects our worship, a God who warns us of the terrifyingly predatory nature of sin.
Which is such a striking image.
Right. And a righteous judge who maintains a daily burning indignation against the wicked.
When you actually engage with the raw material of these texts, the sentimental, pragmatist assumptions of our modern culture, they just evaporate.
They really do. They can't survive it.
No, they can't survive the atmosphere of absolute justice. It forces us into a very uncomfortable corner.
Where you have to ask a defining question.
Exactly. Are we worshiping the God who is actually revealed in Scripture, or have we constructed a golden calf in our own image simply because it makes us feel better about our own autonomy?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand this concept of absolute justice and this, terrifying divine inspection, we can't start with abstract theology.
No, you have to look at history.
Right, how this plays out in human history. We have to go to the fountainhead of human false religion.
Which happens incredibly early on.
That's what's so staggering. This fountainhead doesn't appear thousands of years down the line in some corrupted empire. It happens immediately.
Just one generation outside the Garden of Eden.
Yeah. So to fully grasp the weight of this, we need to understand the minds of the people who first read this account. Let's look at the historical stage.
Right, because Moses is writing this book of Genesis to the Israelites during their wilderness wanderings.
Somewhere in the mid-15th century BC.
Context here is the key that unlocks the entire narrative. Imagine the psychological and spiritual state of that original audience.
The Israelites of the Exodus.
Exactly. They have just spent centuries immersed in the pervasive, deeply ingrained idolatry of Egypt.
Right, a culture where religion was highly visual, very transactional, and just completely human-centered.
Yes. And then God delivers them through undeniable miracles, brings them to the desolate base of Mount Sinai, and gives them the law.
And it wasn't just moral commandments, right?
No. He establishes the tabernacle and institutes an incredibly detailed, bloody, rigid, Levitical sacrificial system.
The whiplash of that must have been intense for them.
Oh, completely.
They go from a pantheon of Egyptian gods who could supposedly be bribed with a little grain or a few rituals to Yahweh.
A God who outlines exact dimensions for altars.
Yeah, specific garments for priests and a relentless requirement for the shedding of blood to cover sin.
God is making it crystal clear that there is only one acceptable way to approach him, and he is the one who dictates the terms.
And it was literally a matter of life and death.
Which they learn the hard way. Moses is writing this Genesis account to a people who have already seen the catastrophic results of unauthorized worship.
Like the incident of the golden calf.
Exactly, where thousands died because they tried to worship Yahweh using Egyptian methods.
And they knew about the rebellion of Nadab and Abihu.
Right, two ordained priests who thought they could bring, quote, unauthorized fire before the Lord.
And they were instantly incinerated by divine holiness.
So when Moses sits down to write the account of Cain and Abel, that original Israelite audience is reading it with their hearts in their throats.
They aren't reading some primitive myth or a bedtime story about two feuding brothers.
No, they are reading foundational covenantal instruction. Moses is pulling back the curtain.
Showing them that this deadly urge to approach God on human terms isn't a new phenomenon created in the wilderness.
It goes all the way back to the very first family, living right in the shadow of Paradise Lost.
But let's talk about the geography of the text, because it is incredibly poignant.
They are living just outside the eastern gates of Eden.
And remember, what is stationed at those gates?
Cherubim.
Yes. And a flaming sword flashing back and forth to guard the way to the tree of life.
Which means this family wakes up every single day with a visible, terrifying reminder of God's unyielding holiness and the reality of human exile.
They're living in the direct, visible aftermath of the fall.
Into this setting, we have these two brothers, Cain and Abel.
Right, and the text makes a point to tell us their vocations. Cain was a worker of the ground, a farmer. Abel was a keeper of sheep, a shepherd.
Now, a careless reading might assume that God somehow prefers shepherds over farmers, but that completely misses the point.
Oh, entirely. Both of these are entirely honorable callings.
They align perfectly with the creation mandate given back in Genesis 1.
Exactly, where God commands humanity to subdue the earth and have dominion over the animals. Cain is doing exactly what he was designed to do in his civic life.
That is a critical distinction to make. There is nothing inherently wicked about Cain's day job.
Right. He is cultivating the ground, working by the sweat of his brow, participating in human flourishing.
The crisis of this narrative does not arise from his vocation. It arises from his religion.
Yes. The breakdown happens when both men bring an offering, a tribute, or mintha in Hebrew, to God.
And this is where the narrative shatters our modern expectations, because Cain is not an atheist.
No, he isn't a secular humanist mocking the idea of the divine. He is a deeply religious man.
He takes the time to gather the fruits of his labor. He builds an altar. He acknowledges Yahweh. He performs a religious ritual.
And God completely, utterly rejects it, which, from a modern perspective, feels incredibly harsh.
I'm sure listeners are thinking exactly that.
Yeah, you might be thinking, wait a minute, shouldn't it be the thought that counts? Let me offer an analogy.
Okay, go for it.
If I get invited to a dinner party by a friend, and I spend hours in my kitchen making a homemade gift or cooking a dish from scratch, even if it's not exactly what the host asked for, my friend is going to accept it graciously.
Because your sincerity is what matters to your friend.
Exactly. The effort counts.
Hmm.
Why does God slam the door on Cain's sincere effort?
To answer that, we actually have to look at the mechanics of the original language.
Okay.
Moses is very deliberate in how he constructs the sentence describing this rejection.
How so?
Well, in English translations, we usually read, God did not look with favor on Cain and his offering. But the original Hebrew syntax uses a specific word order to make a massive theological point.
Okay, what's the word order?
The text explicitly places the name of Cain before the mention of his produce. The grammatical structure forces the reader to realize that God rejected the person of Cain first, and therefore he rejected the offering.
Wow. So the problem wasn't just the vegetables. The problem was the heart of the man holding the vegetables.
Exactly. And this completely subverts how we evaluate worship or human goodness.
We just look at the external gift, right?
Right. We look at the aesthetics of the altar, the effort put into the harvest, the perceived sincerity of the worshiper. But God sovereignly discriminates based on the internal spiritual state of the heart.
Which goes back to my dinner party analogy.
Yeah, your analogy works in human relationships because humans are peers, and our relationships are often based on mutual exchange and sentimentality.
But God is not our peer.
Definitely not. And the religion Cain is practicing here is rooted in a toxic, ancient mindset known as du'utis.
Okay, explain that concept, because I think it is the hidden engine behind a lot of how people still operate today.
Oh, it absolutely is. Du'ut is a Latin phrase that summarizes the religious mechanics of the ancient Near East. It translates to, I give so that you might give.
Ah, okay. A transaction.
It was a crass transactional system. In the surrounding pagan cultures, like the Mesopotamians, the Canaanites, the Egyptians, the gods were believed to actually need physical sustenance.
Wait, like they were actually hungry?
Yes. They depended on human sacrifices, grain and wine to survive. So worship wasn't about love or holiness.
It was essentially a mechanical ritual to placate an erratic, hungry deity.
Exactly. You bribe the god with your produce, and in return, the god owes you rain for your crops or victory in battle.
It just reduces the divine to a cosmic vending machine.
You put your good works in the slot, and blessings are supposed to drop out.
And Cain is treating Yahweh like a vending machine.
Yes, he is.
He brings an unbloody offering of his own labor, harvested from a ground that God explicitly cursed in the previous chapter, and he expects God to accept it based on his human merit.
He is treating the creator of the universe as a debtor.
He is essentially saying, look at what my hands have produced. You are obligated to accept this.
It is the ultimate presumption. Yahweh is the self-sufficient creator. He doesn't need Cain's vegetables.
Like the Psalms later declare, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. If he were hungry, he wouldn't tell us.
Right. What God demands is covenantal integrity. He strictly limits acceptable worship to his revealed will, which points forward to the necessity of grace.
Cain approaches God as if the fall never happened.
As if his hands are clean and his works are sufficient.
But Abel understands the reality of the situation. We get commentary on this in the New Testament, right?
We do. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4 tells us that by faith, Abel offered a more acceptable sacrifice.
Abel brought the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. It was a blood sacrifice.
Abel recognized his fallen state. He looked at that flaming sword guarding Eden and realized, I cannot approach a holy God with the fruit of my own hands. I am a sinner.
I need a substitute. I need innocent blood to cover my guilt.
Abel approached by faith in divine grace. Cain approached by presumption in human works.
And this is why this narrative is the fountainhead of all human false religion.
Every moralistic, legalistic, or purely therapeutic system of belief traces its lineage back to the altar of Cain.
It's the perpetual human attempt to reach God on our own terms.
Yeah.
Without a mediator, without the shedding of blood, and without a broken, contrite heart.
Which brings this reality crashing right into our own living rooms.
Yes, you, the listener, have to evaluate your own spiritual assumptions here. How often do we bring this Cain-like pragmatism into our own lives?
We design things our way.
We do. We turn church services into theatrical entertainment, or we reduce theology to self-help philosophy, and we just expect God to applaud from the balcony because we were sincere.
Or because our intentions were good. It forces a highly uncomfortable mirror in front of us.
Yeah, it does.
If we insist on approaching God solely on our own terms, according to our own preferences, we have to ask who is actually being worshipped.
In that scenario, we are not worshiping the sovereign of Scripture.
No, we are worshiping our own autonomy. We have elevated our own ideas about what is good and acceptable above his explicit revelation.
And when human autonomy crashes headlong into absolute divine holiness, the results are catastrophic.
Completely catastrophic.
Which leads us directly from the rejected altar into the dark, psychological anatomy of apostasy. Because when Cain's self-righteous worship is exposed and rejected by God, his reaction is incredibly telling.
He doesn't fall to his knees.
He doesn't say, Lord, forgive me, show me the right way. He doesn't repent. His unregenerate heart simply boils over.
The psychological realism in this text is just astounding. When a heart built on self-righteousness is confronted by absolute holiness, it does not naturally soften.
It hardens into granite.
Moses uses incredibly vivid, visceral language to describe Cain's internal and external state. The text tells us Cain was very angry and his face fell. But the original language implies so much more than mere frustration.
Yeah, I was actually looking at the linguistic breakdown of this. The Hebrew describes a white-hot, explosive fury. It's a burning anger.
Yes.
And alongside this internal rage, there is the external physical manifestation. His countenance falls.
He is depressed, brooding, and furiously resentful. He can't look God in the eye, and he certainly can't look his righteous brother in the eye.
This is a classic manifestation of what modern psychology might call a severe narcissistic injury. Right?
Exactly. Cain's entire worldview was built on the premise of his own merit. When God rejects the offering, it doesn't just disappoint Cain, it shatters the mirror reflecting his own perceived perfection.
And when that ego is punctured, the natural human response is to lash out and try to destroy the entity that exposed the flaw.
And what's fascinating is God's response to this white-hot fury.
Cain is standing there radiating venomous malice toward his creator, and God doesn't immediately strike him down with lightning.
The sovereign judge of the universe actually condescends to act as a pastor.
In immense, incomprehensible mercy, God initiates a dialogue. He asks diagnostic questions. Why are you angry? Why is your face fallen?
It perfectly mirrors the grace we see in Genesis 3 when God asks Adam, "Where are you?" God possesses omniscience. He obviously knows exactly why Cain is angry.
So the questions are not for God's information.
No, they are for Cain's introspection. God is attempting to get the sinner to articulate his own sin, to recognize the dangerous precipice he is standing on.
It is a profound, word-centered intervention. He's offering Cain a lifeline before the fatal blow is struck.
And God follows up those questions with a warning that contains one of the most bizarre and brilliant grammatical anomalies in the entire biblical text.
Oh, here's where it gets really interesting. Break this down for us.
Okay, so God lays out a choice for Cain. He says, essentially, if you do well, will there not be a lifting up?
And that phrase, lifting up, has a double meaning, right?
Yes, a beautiful double meaning. It can mean the physical lifting up of Cain's fallen, brooding face, restoring his joy and standing. And it also means the lifting up, or the pardoning, of his sin.
God is saying the door of grace is still wide open. Come to me by faith like your brother did, and you will be completely restored.
But then God lays out the negative condition, the terrifying alternative. But if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door.
And this is where the grammatical shock occurs.
For anyone reading the original Hebrew, yes. In Hebrew, nouns have assigned genders. The word used here for sin is a feminine noun.
Okay.
According to the strict rules of standard Hebrew grammar, the adjective or participle that modifies a feminine noun must also be feminine.
Makes sense.
But Moses intentionally shatters the rules of grammar here. He modifies the feminine noun for sin with a masculine singular participle that translates to crouching.
Wait, like leaving a glaring intentional typo in a published manuscript.
Exactly like that. It forces the reader to stop in their tracks and ask, wait, why did he write it like that? Why introduce a masculine descriptor for a feminine word?
So why does he do it?
He does it to dramatically personify sin. Moses is refusing to let the reader view sin merely as an abstract concept, a passive mistake, or just a momentary lapse in judgment.
But breaking the grammar, he turns sin into an active, aggressive, masculine predator.
Right. And to fully grasp the imagery, we have to look at the wider ancient world. In Akkadian literature and ancient Mesopotamian culture, there was a well-known concept of a threshold demon called a robiu.
A threshold demon.
Yes, this was a lurking monster believed to lie in wait at the doorways of houses, ready to pounce on its victims the moment they stepped outside.
Wow. So Moses takes this known cultural nightmare, this doorway demon, strips away the pagan superstition, and uses it as a terrifyingly accurate metaphor for indwelling human sin.
That is exactly what he's doing.
He is telling Cain, and by extension every single listener today, that sin is an apex predator. It is waiting at the threshold of your heart.
It doesn't attack you randomly.
Like a lion stalking a gazelle, it studies your habits. It waits in your blind spots. It looks for the moment you crack the door open through self-righteousness, pride, or envy, and then it lunges to rip you to shreds.
The predator analogy is exact. Sin has an agency, it has a predatory urge, and the text drives this home by using specific vocabulary that points right back to the original tragedy in the Garden of Eden.
Oh, right. God tells Cain that sin's desire is for him, but Cain must rule over it.
And those are the exact same Hebrew words God used in Genesis 3 when speaking to Eve about the consequences of the fall.
Precisely the same. In Genesis 3, those words described a sinful desire to master or usurp authority within human relationships.
Here they describe sin's aggressive, imperialistic urge to completely master and devour the human soul. Sin wants to enslave Cain. It wants to consume his identity.
But God issues a direct, undeniable moral mandate. You must rule over it.
Which is crucial because it destroys the modern narrative of victimhood.
Yeah, God does not allow Cain to view himself as a helpless victim of his own biochemistry or his wounded emotions.
Cain is a moral agent. He is being commanded to exercise dominion over the beast.
But tragically, you know how this story ends. Cain doesn't rule the beast. He allows the beast to devour him completely.
And the narrative immediately shifts from the altar of worship out into the open field.
And the way the text handles this transition is chilling. It says Cain spoke to his brother Abel. But in the original text, it actually omits the dialogue.
It doesn't record what Cain said.
It's this deliberate, eerie silence that emphasizes the cold, calculating nature of his deception. He plays the role of the caring brother to lure Abel away from the safety of the family, away from the presence of the cherubim, out into the total isolation of the field.
It is the anatomy of premeditated murder. And once they are alone in that field, the pacing of the narrative accelerates violently.
The verbs hit you in rapid succession. He rose up and he killed him.
It's swift. It's brutal. There is no drawn-out fight described. And the text repeats the phrase, his brother, over and over again in this brief section.
Moses is hammering home the monstrous, unnatural horror of this act. This isn't a casualty of war against an unknown enemy. This is fratricide.
Cain slaughtered his own flesh and blood. And why did he do it? The Apostle John later tells us in his epistle. Cain killed Abel simply because his own deeds were evil and his brothers were righteous.
The light of Abel's faithful worship was too painful for Cain's darkened conscience to tolerate.
It is a devastating scene, and it serves as a massive warning klaxon for us today.
The Puritan theologian John Owen famously distilled this entire concept into a single piercing maxim: be killing sin, or sin will be killing you.
It's so true. Sin is not a sleeping pet that you can keep in the corner of your life.
You cannot put a leash on it. You cannot train it to behave. If you harbor secret anger, if you nurse envy against a colleague, if you let wounded pride sit in your heart like Cain did, it will metastasize.
It will devour your marriage, it will destroy your career, and ultimately it will damn your soul.
If we pull back and look at why Moses is emphasizing this to the Israelites, the message is clear.
He is telling them that mere physical proximity to holy things like camping near the tabernacle or offering the right sacrifices or being part of the covenant community provides absolutely zero protection if you are harboring a Cain-like heart.
External rituals are entirely worthless if the crouching beast is secretly ruling your internal life.
Exactly.
So we are left with this horrific tableau. Cain has slaughtered his righteous brother in the field. This exposes a terrifying existential reality about the world we live in.
The innocent suffer, and the wicked seem to prosper.
Think about it. Abel, the guy who did everything right, who had true saving faith, who brought the acceptable sacrifice, is lying dead in the dirt. Cain, the religious hypocrite, the murderer, is standing over him, alive and breathing.
If the world is full of Cains, what is God doing about it?
Is God just watching from a distance while his faithful people are slaughtered? This tension, this crisis of justice, drives us straight into the second major text of our deep dive.
We have to move from the bloody field of Genesis 4 into the heavenly courtroom of Psalm 7.
It is a necessary transition, moving from the reality of earthly injustice to the absolute necessity of divine justice. We are stepping into the theology of the Psalter, specifically a psalm written by King David.
And the superscription of Psalm 7 labels it a shiggaion of David.
A shiggaion. That sounds intense. What exactly does that indicate about the tone of this text?
It indicates everything about the tone. The word is derived from a Hebrew root meaning a wild, passionate, or ecstatic song of lamentation. Oh, wow. So it's not a calm, serene hymn sung in a quiet sanctuary.
Not at all. It is an urgent, agonizing, desperate cry for justice. It is the raw emotion of a man pushed to the absolute brink.
And to understand why David is crying out with such wild desperation, we have to understand his historical and political situation at the moment of writing.
The text says he is singing this concerning the words of Cush, a Benjamite.
Who is Cush, and what is the political backdrop here?
So at this point in redemptive history, David has already been anointed by the prophet Samuel as the future king of Israel.
But Saul, the current king, is still sitting on the throne.
Exactly. And Saul has descended into deep corruption. He is deeply paranoid, unstable, and driven by a demonic jealousy toward David, primarily because David is wildly popular with the people after defeating Goliath.
And surrounding King Saul is a court full of sycophants, flatterers, and political opportunists. Cush the Benjamite is one of these insiders.
Right.
So Cush is basically a corrupt politician whispering poison into the king's ear. He's running a state-sponsored smear campaign against David. Yes. Cush is launching malicious, treasonous accusations. He is likely telling Saul that David is an insurrectionist, that David is actively plotting to assassinate the king and violently seize the throne.
Because of these lies, David is stripped of his civil protections. He goes from being a national hero to public enemy number one.
He is forced to flee the capital and run into the Judean wilderness.
He is hiding in desolate caves, cut off from his family, cut off from the sanctuary worship of Yahweh, and being hunted like a literal animal by the royal army.
It is a severe covenantal anomaly. It's the exact same problem we saw with Cain and Abel, just on a national scale.
The wicked, Saul and Cush, are wielding the immense power of the state. They had the throne, the army, the wealth, and the political narrative.
And God's anointed innocent servant is hiding in a hole in the ground, starving and terrified.
It raises the exact same agonizing question as the blood of Abel crying from the ground. If God is perfectly good, and if God is sovereign, why are the wicked in charge?
Why is righteousness punished with exile while corruption is rewarded with a palace?
In David's day, the earthly courts were entirely corrupted by tribal favoritism. Cush and Saul were both Benjamites. They protected their own.
If the entire justice system is rigged against you, where does a righteous man turn for a fair trial?
And this is where David's response becomes so incredibly counterintuitive, frankly, so difficult for us to emulate. Because David actually gets a chance to take justice into his own hands.
Yes, the cave of En-Gedi.
Right. If you read 1 Samuel 24, there is this incredible moment where King Saul unknowingly wanders into the very cave where David and his men are hiding in the darkness.
David's men are whispering to him, "This is it. God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Kill him, end the manhunt, and take the throne."
But David refuses to strike the fatal blow. He sneaks up and cuts off a corner of Saul's robe to prove he could have killed him. But he leaves the vengeance entirely to God.
It's astounding.
How is a man who has been slandered and hunted able to restrain himself like that?
David is able to hold back his sword solely because his mind is anchored to the theological bedrock that he articulates in Psalm 7, verse 11.
Okay, let's look at that.
David does not rely on his own ability to execute justice. He relies entirely on this profound, stabilizing truth. God judgeth the righteous, and God is angry with the wicked every day.
Let's break down the mechanics of the first half of that verse. In Hebrew, the phrase is ushum shutikik.
God is the righteous judge.
Yes.
But the grammar adds a layer of comfort that English translations sometimes miss. The word used for judge here is an active participle.
Okay, what does that mean in this context?
In Hebrew syntax, when a participle is used in this specific way, it doesn't merely describe something God did once in the ancient past, nor does it describe something he might eventually get around to doing in the distant future.
So it's ongoing.
Yes, it denotes a continuous, unceasing, characteristic action. The text is literally saying that God is in the unceasing act of judging. It is his inherent, moment-by-moment nature to evaluate the moral actions of the universe.
Now, I have to bring in an analogy here, because when we hear the word judge, we immediately project our experience with human courts onto God.
Which is very dangerous.
Exactly. If I get a parking ticket today, or if I'm involved in a lawsuit, my experience of justice depends heavily on incredibly fragile human factors.
Like what?
Well, if the judge didn't sleep well the night before, or if my lawyer is particularly charismatic, or if there's a technical loophole in the paperwork, I might get out of it.
Earthly courts are plagued by delays, hidden biases, and massive blind spots. People get away with terrible crimes every single day because of a lack of evidence.
So how does God's courtroom fundamentally differ from that broken system?
The contrast is absolute. Earthly justice is contingent, flawed, and often blind to the truth. But God's standard of justice, the reason he is explicitly called a righteous judge, is derived entirely from his own unchangeable, infinite, holy nature.
He cannot be bribed by wealth or religious rituals.
He cannot be manipulated by clever rhetoric or PR campaigns. And most importantly, he is never ignorant of the facts because he is omniscient.
He doesn't just see the external actions. He weighs the secret hidden motives of the human heart.
So David, sitting in the damp darkness of that cave, knows that Cush's slander and political spin might work perfectly on King Saul, but it has zero effect on the Supreme Court of Heaven.
God knows exactly what David did and exactly what Cush is doing.
And because God is perfectly righteous, he cannot remain neutral toward sin.
Right. Think about a human judge. If an earthly judge sees a horrific crime, say a murderer caught on video, and the judge simply bangs the gavel and says, well, I'm just going to let that slide, I'm feeling generous today, we wouldn't call that judge righteous.
We would call that judge profoundly corrupt. Love and goodness require an opposition to evil.
Because God is an absolutely righteous judge, his righteousness necessitates an active, holy, forceful reaction against moral evil.
Which brings us to the second half of Psalm 7.11. And this is where the text gets incredibly intense, moving us into the reality of divine indignation.
Because God doesn't just sit back in heaven and watch injustice happen passively, shaking his head in disappointment.
The second half of the verse declares, God is angry with the wicked every day.
Notice the deliberate shift in the names David uses for God here. In the first clause, when talking about God the judge, David uses Oshim, the plural of majesty, pointing to the supreme creator.
But in the second clause, when describing God's anger, David switches to the ancient Semitic name El.
Why the change? What does ill signify to the Hebrew mind?
El emphasizes God and his terrifying, singular, irresistible omnipotence. It is a title of raw power.
The author is underscoring exactly who the sinner is dealing with.
The unrepentant, wicked person isn't facing the anger of a frail human whose wrath can be avoided, outrun, or overpowered. They are facing the wrath of El the Almighty, the one who spoke galaxies into existence, who sustains the universe by the word of his power, and who possesses infinite capability to cast both body and soul into hell.
That is a staggering, sobering thought.
Hmm.
And we need to carefully define the word used for anger here. The Hebrew word is zhom, rooted in the verb zayam. I want to make sure we understand this properly because our human experience of anger is almost always tainted. When I get angry, it's usually because my pride is wounded, or I'm impatient in traffic, or I lose my temper because I'm exhausted.
Human anger is erratic, ego-driven, and messy.
Is that what this word means when it's applied to the Almighty? Is God just throwing a cosmic temper tantrum?
Not at all. We have to strip away our anthropomorphic projections. The root word Zion carries profound, terrifying theological weight.
Okay, so what does it actually mean?
It does not mean mild irritation. It certainly doesn't mean an unholy loss of temper. It denotes an intense, active, holy abhorrence. It is pure judicial fury.
It describes the boiling over of divine indignation against intolerable covenantal treason and brazen moral rebellion.
So it is a pure, clean, completely justified wrath. It's not a flaw in God's character. It's the perfect, necessary reaction of infinite purity coming into contact with moral pollution.
Just as light naturally obliterates darkness, God's holiness naturally reacts against sin with fierce indignation.
And the modifier that David attaches to this holy indignation is chilling. He says God is angry every day. It is a continuous state.
That entirely shatters the illusion that God's wrath is dormant, or that he only gets angry during massive events like the flood or the destruction of Sodom.
It means the clock of divine justice is ticking incessantly, every single second.
The wicked might enjoy temporary earthly prosperity. They might be sitting in the palace like Cush, eating well, feeling completely secure in their political power, mocking the idea of judgment.
But this verse reveals that the sword of divine justice is hanging over their heads by a single fraying thread of divine patience every second of their existence.
Now, I have to step in and push back here on behalf of a vast majority of modern listeners.
Sure, go ahead.
Because if you walk into most churches today or speak to most modern theologians and you say, God is a terrifying almighty power who experiences boiling judicial fury and holy abhorrence against sinners every single day, people are going to run for the exits.
They absolutely will.
Doesn't a God who is angry every day contradict the fundamental foundational biblical idea that God is love? Why do modern religious institutions shy away from this specific attribute so aggressively?
It is a vital question, and the texts we are analyzing address the cultural forces behind this shift.
Okay, what forces?
Modern religious thought has been deeply infected with a desire for cultural pragmatism. The ultimate goal often becomes making the listener feel comfortable, which leads to seeker-sensitive methodology.
They want to attract crowds, and quite frankly, wrath doesn't sell.
So they present the celestial therapist we talked about at the very beginning, highlighting God's love, his grace, and his patience, while entirely silencing his justice, his holiness, and his wrath. They essentially cut the Bible in half.
And our sources point out that this softening of God's character isn't happening in a vacuum. It is heavily influenced by broader societal ideologies.
Like evolutionary materialism, secular totalitarianism, and various critical social frameworks.
Now, it's important to state that we are impartially examining how these ancient texts view modern culture. We aren't here to endorse a specific political platform. But the perspective of our sources is that these modern frameworks attempt to redefine sin and justice entirely by horizontal human metrics.
That's exactly the conflict. Modern frameworks often argue that human depravity isn't a rebellion against a holy creator, but simply a byproduct of socioeconomic structures, historical power dynamics, or evolutionary biology.
They redefine sin as merely societal dysfunction.
The biblical text insists that this is a fatal error. If we are to understand the reality of Psalm 7.11, we have to recognize the objective, unyielding nature of divine wrath against personal, individual, moral rebellion.
To eliminate divine wrath is to eviscerate the law. And if you destroy the law, you ultimately pervert and destroy the gospel itself.
Because if the wrath of God isn't real, if there is no daily indignation against sin, then what exactly do we need saving from?
The idea of a savior becomes just a nice sentimental thought, maybe a moral example, instead of an absolute desperate life or death necessity.
Exactly.
So if we bring this directly to you, the listener, right now, wherever you're listening to this deep dive, why should you care about this terrifying daily indignation? What is the practical relevance of this doctrine for your life today?
This doctrine functions in two drastically different ways, depending entirely on where you stand in relation to God.
Okay, start with the believer.
For the persecuted, for the believer who is suffering profound earthly injustice, who's being slandered like David or oppressed by corrupt systems, this daily indignation is actually a source of profound comfort.
It means you are not forgotten.
It means you don't have to poison your own soul with bitterness by taking revenge. You can rest in the absolute certainty that justice is coming. God sees, God cares, and the righteous judge will act to vindicate his people.
But for the unrepentant person,
For the unrepentant person, it is a terrifying, immediate reality.
if you are harboring secret sins, living in pride, relying on your own self-righteousness, acting like Cain at the altar or Cush in the palace, you are dangling by a thread over the fire of divine justice.
The text is designed to violently strip away your false sense of immunity and drive you to your knees in repentance before the bow of God's wrath is finally fired.
Which brings us to a massive, towering theological problem. If we put these two texts together, Genesis 4 and Psalm 7, we're left with an absolute crisis.
A huge one.
On one hand, Genesis 4 shows us that every single human heart is infected with the crouching beast of sin. We all have the capacity for Cain's murderous pride and self-righteousness.
And on the other hand, Psalm 7 shows us that God is perfectly righteous, cannot ignore sin, and his holy indignation burns against the wicked every single day.
So what does this all mean? How can anyone possibly survive? If we are all Cains at heart and God is angry every day, how can God maintain his perfect justice and yet save sinners?
You have just articulated the central crisis of the entire biblical narrative. It is the core question of all redemptive history.
Because if God simply sweeps our sin under the rug and says, don't worry about it, he is no longer a righteous judge.
He compromises his own holy nature, making him corrupt. But if he executes the full, unmitigated measure of his daily indignation upon us, we are all eternally damned.
There is no human way out of this paradox.
The only way to view these texts and find any hope is to look through them to the ultimate resolution, the seed of the woman promised back in Genesis 3.
We have to look to the culmination of the narrative. We have to look to Jesus Christ.
Let's look at the incredible structural and typological parallels between Abel in Genesis 4 and Jesus Christ in the New Testament Gospels.
The historical echoes are breathtaking. Abel was a shepherd who brought a pleasing blood sacrifice to God.
And Jesus explicitly calls himself the Good Shepherd, the one who lays down his life for the sheep, offering himself as the ultimate perfect sacrifice.
Abel was hated without cause. He was envied and violently murdered by his own brother, a religious hypocrite who trusted in his own works.
Just like Jesus was hated without cause, envied, and murdered by the corrupt religious leaders of his day.
The Pharisees and chief priests were the ultimate spiritual descendants of Cain, trusting entirely in the fruit of their own self-righteous hands while plotting murder.
And pay attention to the geography. Cain lured Abel out into the open field, away from the safety of the family and the sanctuary, in order to slaughter him.
And Jesus was led outside the gates of Jerusalem. He was cast out of the holy city and crucified on a Roman cross outside the walls.
The parallels are staggering. It's almost as if the murder of Abel is a prophetic shadow of the crucifixion.
But there is a fundamental universe-altering difference between the two events, isn't there?
Yes, and this is where the author of Hebrews brings the entire theological tapestry together. We are pointed specifically to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 24.
In Genesis 4, God tells Cain that the blood of murdered Abel is crying out from the ground. What is that blood crying for?
It is crying out for vengeance. It is demanding justice under the law for a horrific crime.
It's crying out, condemn the murderer, avenge my death, execute the wrath of Psalm 7.
Exactly. But Hebrews 12 says that believers have come to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel.
A better word. What is the better word that the blood of Christ speaks?
While the blood of Abel cries out for the condemnation of the sinner, the blood of Jesus Christ cries out from the cross, Father, Forgive them.
Instead of demanding vengeance upon us, the infinite sin-atoning blood of the Son of God speaks eternal pardon, absolute justification, and permanent reconciliation for God's people.
That's the better word.
Okay, but we have to answer the paradox. How does that actually solve the problem of Psalm 7.11? How does God forgive us without ignoring justice?
How does he pardon the guilty without compromising his role as the righteous judge who is angry every day?
Exactly.
He solves it through the profound, glorious reality of penal substitutionary atonement.
Okay, what does that mean practically?
At the cross of Calvary, Jesus Christ willingly stepped into the place of his people. He took our guilt upon himself.
Our Cain-like rebellion, our Cush-like slander, our self-righteousness, our secret pride. He legally absorbed the full weight of it.
So Jesus actually became the target of Psalm 7.11.
Wow.
Yes. That full, concentrated za'am, that boiling, holy, daily indignation of Almighty God that we rightfully deserved, was not swept under the rug. It was not ignored.
It was poured out entirely, without mixture, upon Jesus Christ on the cross.
God's sword of justice wasn't blunted or put away. It was awakened and struck the Good Shepherd. The righteous judge executed the full penalty of the law.
Christ drank the cup of divine fury down to the very dregs. He exhausted the wrath of God so that there is not a single drop left for those who put their faith in him.
The wrath of Psalm 7.11 was completely satisfied. In theological terms, it was propitiated.
Because the infinite penalty was paid in full by a substitute of infinite worth, God's absolute righteousness was maintained. Justice was done.
This is the only way the Apostle Paul can declare in Romans chapter 3 that God is both just and the justifier of him which believeth in Jesus.
He maintains his perfect justice because the crime was severely punished, and he exercises infinite grace because the Savior stepped in to take the punishment for us.
It's breathtaking when you grasp the mechanics of it.
The throne of terrifying judgment transforms into a throne of infinite, accessible grace for anyone who flees to Christ.
It is the only true resolution to the human condition. And the texts emphasize that this true justice and true reconciliation cannot be found anywhere else.
You cannot find it in human works. You cannot find it in modern societal frameworks, political maneuvering, or self-help therapies.
It is found solely at the foot of the cross, completely apart from our own merits.
We must abandon the way of Cain. We have to stop trying to bring the meager fruit of our own hands to God, drop our self-righteousness, and trust entirely in the imputed righteousness of Jesus Christ.
Which is really the ultimate takeaway here.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. Let's synthesize what we've uncovered in this deep dive.
Right, we covered a lot of ground.
We started by stripping away the cultural illusion of a passive, indulgent, celestial therapist God. We looked at Genesis 4 and saw the terrifying reality of human sin. It is a crouching beast, an apex predator waiting to master us if we try to approach God on our own self-righteous terms like Cain did.
We saw the psychological metastasis of pride into murderous anger.
And then we looked at the unyielding daily indignation of the righteous judge in Psalm 7, a God whose holy abhorrence of evil burns continuously against the unrepentant, ensuring that justice will always be served.
It is a heavy, solemn reality. It strips away all our excuses and all our superficial religion.
But it is designed to drive us inexorably to the only safe harbor in the universe, the cross of Jesus Christ, where that terrifying divine wrath is fully satisfied by the better blood that cries out for forgiveness.
Absolutely.
Now, before we sign off, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week.
What's that?
When we think about the story of Genesis 4, we naturally think of the crouching beast of sin hiding in our darkest vices, right?
Sure. We assume it waits in our worst moments of anger, or our glaring moral failures, or obvious addictions.
But considering the story of Cain, a man who was condemned while standing at an altar, offering a sacrifice. What if the beast is actually crouching right at the door of your greatest religious successes? Wow. What if the moment you feel most spiritually self-sufficient, most pleased with the fruit of your own hands, and most confident in your own moral goodness? Wait, no, is the exact second you are most in danger of becoming the architect of your own apostasy?
That is a piercing question. It demands that we constantly, ruthlessly examine the true foundation of our worship and our confidence.
It really does. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the absolute holiness of God and the magnificent substitutionary grace of the cross. We encourage you to rest securely, not in your own efforts or achievements, but entirely in the perfect, finished work of Christ. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep thinking deeply.